Rink Wide, Vancouver, Jeff and Irf with you here as we head into the Stanley Cup Final. Not quite there yet, and we'll spend a little bit of time later on, Irf, for predictions about the final, but it's Canucks pod. So in a week that's actually had a fair bit of Canucks news, want to get to changes on the coaching staff, a little bit of Ian Cole news, and that kind of is where we'll start with free agency at the very least, because I know that you've got your ear to the ground all the time. When we did this last week, I was like, it's not even June yet. Relax, everybody. But you know what? We're into a week into June now. And before you know it, July 1st is going to be here. The Canucks have these big decisions to make about so many of their pending UFAs, obviously an RFA and Philip Hronek as well. So where do you want to begin? First of all, I say, hi, how you doing?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you? What's going on? How's summer so far, I guess?
Well, no, it feels like it's finally arrived.
Yeah.
So, yeah, next one we'll have to take this to a patio or somewhere, get a sponsorship and do the pod on patio. I like the sounds of that, but we're not there yet. And neither are the Canucks. July 1st is still a couple of weeks away. So, the panic level, it can't be high, but there are a lot of balls in the air with this Vancouver Canuck Hockey Club. And so many of those unrestricted free agents are guys that are penalty killers as well. That's an area that they're going to have to keep an eye on. But let's get right into it because I know that throughout the season, you've kept pretty close tabs on both Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, and those are two guys that are front burner issues for the Vancouver Canucks.
Well, I think you mentioned it right there. They're front burner issues. They're priorities for the Vancouver Canucks. I think the Vancouver Canucks, by all accounts, would love to have Elias Lindholm return to the organization on a long-term deal. I don't think you trade a first-round pick and don't want to sign him long-term. So it's not for a lack of trying. I think the one thing that the Vancouver Canucks are going to have, unless they trade him, which I don't think happens, is they can offer that 8th year. Now, whether they do that or they don't with Elias Lindholm, that's going to be the big question. But for Lindholm, I mean, look, I think the fit here's been great. I think the camaraderie with his teammates have been great. I think that, yeah, during the regular season, it was a little bit of, up and down. He had that injury, but in the playoffs, they don't get through that Nashville series without him. So it's a number, right? It's a number game. Does he want that big contract that teams are going to give him? And I think that when you look at him from his perspective, it's go get your money right now, right? If you can, there's going to be a team out there that offers you what you're going to want. But I think for him, he wants to stay. And I think for the Vancouver Canucks perspective, they'd love to have him. Now, whether the two sides have talked, I know they've talked. Now, whether there's been an offer one way or the other, I think that one remains to be seen. But let me put it out there. Like, they both know what each other wants. And I think that as we head down this road, as we inch towards July 1st, it's going to come to a point where the Canucks say, okay, that's too much, or Lindholm, or the Canucks make their final offer and Lindholm agrees to it. Or it's going to get to a point where in the next little bit we say, okay, he's off to free agency. It's not, but for me, it hasn't gotten to that point yet.
I guess, and this is all part of negotiation. It becomes a game of chicken. And if the Canucks feel they've made their best and final offer, Lindholm has to decide if they're bluffing or if, in fact, those are the numbers. But, if you're the Canucks at some point, this can't go right up until, the final minutes before July 1st, because they also want to be active in free agency. They're going to have to know how much money they have to play with. They're going to have to know what positions within the depth chart they're going to have to address. So even though we say that there's time on their side here, it's such a long checklist for them, and they've got such big ticket items at the top that it does feel like, something that they'd probably like to start to make some progress on here so that they can, if they realize that they just can't get there with one of these guys, then you can turn your attention and start to move on to the next project. So it'd be interesting to see if we see some movement there on that front. The Lindholm camp, I thought it was fascinating. I don't know if you caught Rick Tocchet's entire Zoom availability. We'll talk about that when we talk about coaching later on, but he name-checked Lindholm a couple of times throughout. And so I just thought, that's interesting that, unsolicited, he wasn't asked about him. But Lindholm, when he was talking about players that gravitated towards Yogi Savikoski, and he was like, the rapport that he's got with JT Miller and Elias Lindholm, and I was like, that's the second name off your tongue, man. You're the head coach. And so I don't know if there's something there, but I just thought that was interesting to me at the very least that, he's still on the top of the mind of the head coach.
Well, it's a good negotiating tactic. I know Rick Tocchet's a smart guy, right? You name your guys, you want to keep. But look, I think it's no secret. I really don't. I think, like I said before, Jeff, you don't trade a first-round pick without hoping you're able to sign that player to a long-term extension. Now, whether that happens here in the next little while, it obviously is going to will remain to be seen. But definitely know the two sides have spoken.
What about Zadorov? We saw that he was out golfing with Murph. Looked like he didn't have a care in the world, and why would you if you're teeing it up at Cap? JT out there having, and the weather wasn't the best, but otherwise looked like a pretty good opportunity to get out. Big Z on the first tee. Where, I mean, there's a bunch of noise, but I'm not sure that anybody's really been able to cut through the clutter here with Nikita Zadorov and where exactly he and the Canucks are here 3 weeks away from free agency.
Yeah, Jeff, you mentioned a guy that's name's been talked about a lot, and that's Nikita Zadorov. It's interesting. It's been hot. It's been not. He's a big guy. He's going to want the big ticket. I said that before. It's interesting because there's a lot of people saying the talks haven't been there around the Vancouver Canucks, and it looks like it's going to go the direction of free agency. It's not for the lack of not trying. The Canucks offered Nikita Zadorov a contract that had the term that he was looking for. So that's the interesting part. It's whether the two sides can come to an agreement if at some point on the dollar value of that AAV. It's no secret that 6 times 6, obviously that wasn't the offer. That might have been the ask by his camp or whatever it was, down the road, or what people thought the projection could be. But it's definitely was lower than that. So it's going to be interesting to see if Vancouver can come up or Nikita Zadorov decides that he really wants to stay, as what the Canucks have offered for him here in Vancouver for the next 5 or 6 years. So we'll keep an ear on that. We'll definitely keep, listening to things. But as you mentioned before, there is some noise. And usually when there is there's definitely some fire. So it's going to be fun to keep an eye on Big Z here in the coming weeks.
All right. Well, we'll see where that one goes. Obviously, again, there's still 3.5 weeks or so before a guy like Zadorov can hit the open market. Now, we heard Dolly reported earlier in the week that Ian Cole is likely to get to unrestricted free agency. That's not a huge surprise. I mean, the Canucks can't keep all of their free agents, and really they shouldn't want to keep all of them. I mean, running back with the same group might allow them to have success again, but they've got to find a way to improve. And so not enough money to go around for everybody. Ian Cole is 35. He'll be 36 late in next regular season. Championship pedigree. Just a character guy through and through, well liked and respected by his teammates. But at the end of the day, it's where is his game? And I think that there was a fall off in the second half of the season. Got hurt in the playoffs a little bit, tried to play through it, but had a tough go against the Edmonton Oilers. I'm not surprised that he becomes one of the casualties here, if in fact that's the way it goes. What did you make of that news that Ian Cole looks like he's headed for unrestricted free agency?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone should be surprised that is the case for Ian Cole. You mentioned the championship pedigree. I think that was great, and he was in the room and was able to build this group, but they were one win away from the conference final now. So this team should know by, being battle tested in a couple of rounds of the playoffs, what it takes to get there. And it is difficult. So for Ian Cole, I mean, I wonder if a team does, take a chance on, you mentioned a 35-year-old now, a little long in the tooth, didn't really have a good second half of the season. And we all know about the playoffs and how it wasn't his finest work. No surprise there. But for the Canucks now, you have to go and try and find another defenseman. Now, whether that comes from a guy like Noah Juulsen, is he going to be an everyday NHL player, or do you go out and try and sign someone in free agency to fill that role? Or is it going to be someone from within your organization that you hope can make the jump from the American League and be a full-time NHL guy?
Right. I think one area that you have to give Cole his props, even at his advanced age, and he used sort of that veteran savvy. He was a great penalty killer. And he was one of the things that the Canucks, last year in free agency, they targeted that. They were the worst penalty killing team in the National Hockey League. They went out, they bring in Ian Cole, they bring in Teddy Bluger, they bring in Carson Soucy, all on that first day of free agency last year. And all of those guys played a key role in the penalty kill. Now, Soucy was injured twice, so missed a good couple of chunks of the season, but there in the playoffs was one of their penalty killers as well. And Ian Cole was terrific in the Nashville series. As we said, the play against Edmonton, I don't know if it was the speed of the Oilers, if it was just getting into a second round of playing every other day, high-level hockey. He had a tough go. But again, I don't want to dump on the guy as he's leaving town. Like, I think Ian Cole did play a role for this hockey club. And so I mentioned earlier, Ian Cole led the Canucks in penalty killing ice time in the playoffs. In fact, their top 6 penalty killers in the playoffs by ice time are all pending unrestricted free agents, which is wild. In Lindholm, Zadorov, we talked about, Teddy Bluger, Dakota Joshua, so they'll be able to. Tyler Myers is the other one. They're going to be able to retain a couple. Like, I expect that Myers will be back. I think they want Teddy Bluger back. Beyond that, the more costly guys, we just touched on two of them. I don't know what's going to happen there, but I do wonder. And I wrote a piece this week at Canucks Army, just exploring this idea. Are the Canucks, for a second straight July 1st, going to have to prioritize penalty killing, target penalty killers? And I looked at the top 10 penalty killing teams in the National Hockey League this past regular season and looked at who some of the unrestricted free agents are on those teams. It doesn't mean that those are guys that are going to land here in Vancouver, but I was just looking at guys who are going to shake free on July 1st who have come from really good penalty killing systems in the National Hockey League. And might there be a fit for some of these guys? So you can check that out online. I won't give it all away for free here on the pod, but if you're thinking about penalty killing options for the Vancouver Canucks in unrestricted free agency, certainly some intriguing names out there as we work our way closer to July the 1st. Dakota Joshua was the other guy that we didn't really talk about. It doesn't sound like anybody's really talking about Dakota Joshua, at least behind the scenes in terms of contract. Anything there with Joshua and negotiations with the Canucks?
No, nothing at all. I think that it's been quiet, and I think that, the Canucks, in the back of their minds know that this is a guy that he's going to go and get his money. Some team's going to offer him what he wants to be paid, what he thinks he deserves to be paid. Now, whether the fit for him on that team is better than what would have been here for the Vancouver Canucks, that could be two completely different stories. But Dakota Joshua is a guy that, for Jeff, for the first time in his career, is going to see some real NHL money thrown his way. He's not going to be playing on a deal that pays him $800,000. He's going to be playing on a deal that probably plays him upwards of nearly $3.5, maybe even $4 million somewhere in the NHL. So I'm all about guys getting their bag. I've said it. I've said it on every show that I've ever been on. Go get your money if you can. And if you're Dakota Joshua and the team's giving you that much money, you go and take it every single day.
And they'll miss him. I mean,
yep.
The size, obviously. This is a guy that would have been a 20-goal scorer if he hadn't missed a quarter of the season with the hand injury. Led the team in hits, was among the NHL leaders in hits, led the team in hits in the playoffs as well. So he brings an awful lot. I do wonder, if he goes, they're going to miss parts of him. I think for me, there was a consistency I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. But again, maybe that comes with time and experience, although he's not a young player. He's been a bit of a late bloomer at the National Hockey League level, but even in the playoffs, when he was on and dialed in, you noticed him, but there were long stretches there as well. And I think for him to really be, able to take his game to the next level, I think it's going to be an every night kind of thing for Dakota Joshua. And so, a bit of buyer beware there. But all it takes is one team that meets his price. And I'm with you. This guy hasn't been raking in the dough since he was 20 or 21. It took him until he was basically 27 and 28 to become a full-time National Hockey Leaguer. So playing catch up a little bit on that front. And if there's an offer there that's just too good to refuse, then I have no doubt that that's where he's going to go. And unfortunately for the Vancouver guy, likable guy. I think teammates liked him. I think they respect the way that, he stuck up for a guy like Connor Garland, maybe ill-advised in a game in Chicago to get in a scrap. But hey, situation, he didn't think twice, jumped in there. So did a lot of good for the Vancouver Canucks. I don't want to sound like I'm sour on Dakota Joshua. I'm really curious to see where this goes. I just think that in the playoffs, I would have liked to have seen a little, because, I don't have expectations on everybody, but I think it was fair to have expectations because he delivered. And I just think in the playoffs, again, there were a couple of periods where he was terrific and was able to do all kinds of things, but there were also a couple of stretches that went, game to game that needed a little bit more from him. You can say that about a lot of guys, so I'm certainly not singling him out. But it's going to be fascinating to see where things go with Dakota Joshua as we work our way closer to unrestricted free agency. The other thing, too, here is it's still early and hockey's being played, but it shouldn't be too long before we start to hear some names that are linked to the Vancouver Canucks the other way, as we're talking about guys that are leaving town. And so that's always a fun part of, the 10 days leading into free agency is when you start to hear some names of possible players that are on the Vancouver Canucks radar. So we'll see what happens there in the days and the weeks ahead. Rink Wide Vancouver, a presentation of the Applewood Auto Group. And right now at Applewood Mitsubishi Richmond, you can get the 2024 Outlander PHEV, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Rate starting from 4.49%, plus the industry's best warranty. Remember, it's all good at Applewood. We will talk about the Stanley Cup Final and get our predictions there a little bit as things get going on Saturday. It feels like forever. It could have taken a family vacation to Hawaii for a week and not missed any hockey action, but that's the way it goes. But it does get going here on Saturday down in South Florida. Want to get into some other news around the Vancouver Canucks, and that was the coaching decision and the coaching change and the announcement that was made, and Rick Tocchet meeting with the media. We referenced that a little bit earlier on. So we'll get into that as we carry on here. Rink Wide Vancouver, a presentation of the Applewood Auto Group. Jeff and Irf with you, and a whole lot more still ahead. We've all heard of the overdose crisis, also known as the toxic drug crisis. But did you know that it affects men disproportionately? Last year, 78% of people dying here in BC were men, and the majority were 30 to 59-year-olds. It's not easy to struggle with addiction, and the stigma around it can make it harder for people to reach out for help. But there is help and support available. Every journey is different, and the thing that helps might not be the same for everyone. So when someone does reach out, be compassionate and have open, non-judgmental conversations. We here at Rink Wide Vancouver want to be part of the solution. If you or someone you care about is struggling, you can find supports and services near you at helpstartshere.gov.bc.ca. You can also watch powerful real-life stories of recovery on the Help Starts Here website. Rink Wide Vancouver, Jeff and Irf here. No games, and this is a post-game pod generally, but there's still lots going on, as we talked about in that opening segment, Irf, that we'll get the gang together here and push out podcasts on a weekly basis up and through free agency the rest of the summer. We got to get out on the golf course, so we get priorities. But for the time being right now, we'll continue to talk Canucks hockey at least semi-regularly here on Rink Wide, which is brought to you in part by the Vancouver Canadians, who are out on the road, but they're going to be back for a big homestand starting next Tuesday, June the 11th, which is Dog Days of Summer Day at the ballpark. You can bring your pup to the park, let them soak in the atmosphere at Nat Bailey, and don't miss the nooner at the Nat on Friday the 14th. That includes a rain-out doubleheader against Spokane, and of course, Father's Day should be on everybody's radar now, June 16th. It's a family fun Sunday at Nat Bailey Stadium, so it might be a great day to take dad out to the ballpark, catch fireworks, giveaways, Friday nooners, superstar appearances all spring and summer long. Get your tickets. Call 604-872-5232 or go to CanadiansBaseball.com. All right, it was a newsworthy week for the Vancouver Canucks. On Wednesday, they promote from within Yogi Svedkovsky, who's been the skills coach for the last couple of years. But I think some people think skills coach is a guy that's in the background. Like, this is a guy that was on the ice at almost every practice with the Vancouver Canucks, traveled, certainly in the playoffs, was out on the road. I'm not sure if he was on every road trip, but he was hands-on. Like, he had a voice at the round table that Rick Tocchet talks about an awful lot. And we found out on Wednesday that, Tocchet looked outside the organization. On the same day the Canucks promote Yogi, the Toronto Maple Leafs hire Lane Lambert, who was a head coach with the New York Islanders before he was fired and replaced by Patrick Waugh. And so Craig Berube goes that route with an associate coach who had NHL head coaching experience. The Canucks giving Yogi this opportunity. Tocchet talked at length about how even if Mike Yeo had been around, or that they were still going to find ways to, put more on his plate to increase his role with this hockey club. But ultimately, they decide the candidate that they were looking for was right there on their staff already. What do you make of the promotion of Yogi Svedkovsky?
Well, to be completely honest, Jeff, I think the promotion was before the season started when he became a full-time member of the Canucks staff. I think that was an important thing to remember. That was just before this season. So he didn't do camps on the side. He didn't do skill sessions with anybody else. He was a employee of the Vancouver Canucks. And I think that that's huge, right? I think, you heard Rick Tocchet mention that guys would walk by his office and says, "Oh no, we're not looking for you. We're looking for Yogi." But that's the relationship that he's built with those guys. Now, a relationship with the skills coach and a guy that works on the ice for a long period of time with maybe guys that are injured and things like that is a little bit different from a guy that's an everyday bench guy. But from what they believe is that he can translate those relationships and try and help the power play. It's no secret that they were looking for a guy that's going to take the reins off of Rick Tocchet a little bit. He's going to still be involved in trying to get the power play to click, trying to do different things and all of that. But for the Vancouver Canucks, it's huge to get, Yogi signed and on the bench there for the Vancouver Canucks. Now, another full-time member of that staff, Adam Foote, now switches over and kind of takes over that PK role a little bit while Yogi takes on the power play. Rick Tocchet obviously does head coaching duties and so on and so forth. But yeah, some big news. I mean, Rick Tocchet probably talked to some potential replacements for that role externally, but right there, like you just mentioned, it was right under their nose. Internally, they got it done. Pay increase for Yogi, obviously, now gets to be on an NHL bench, and a job well earned for him, who, obviously in these parts in Vancouver, he's a guy that's been around forever, right? Worked in a lot of different organizations, did a lot of different skill sessions, did summer stuff with professional guys a lot, and now he gets his opportunity, a long time coming, for him to be behind an NHL bench.
Yeah, lots of good years with the Vancouver Giants as well. So it certainly worked his way into this opportunity. And I'm delighted to see a guy get that chance and break through. I did wonder, though, because as we talked about, he was on the staff. He was there down the stretch and in the playoffs. The Sedins were there down the stretch and in the playoffs. The power play let the Vancouver Canucks down. And I did wonder if this was an opportunity to go scour the bushes of the hockey world to find a power play specialist, somebody with coming in fresh, not necessarily fresh ideas, although sure, you'd like some of those, but just somebody that wasn't attached to this group. Because if the answers were there with this coaching staff, why didn't somebody find a way to make some changes down the stretch and ultimately against the Oilers when the power play faltered and let the Vancouver Canucks down? So that's my only sort of concern here, but that's not necessarily on Yogi. And as you said, he's going to be in charge of the power play, but not full control. It's not a one-man thing. Rick Tocchet is the head coach, and the buck stops with him. It's interesting, too, that Adam Foote, who hasn't been an NHL coach for long, but drew rave reviews for the work that he did with the defense corps. Guy killed a few penalties in his day as a player. So, and he was there. Right? He was involved. It wasn't like he wasn't paying attention when Mike Yeo was running the penalty kill, but there was a transition there. And then also Manny coming in out in Abbotsford.
Yeah.
And Rick was asked about the lack of experience, and he said, hey, it's on me to bring these guys together, to bring them up to speed, and we'll see. It's impossible to, cast a judgment on an NHL coaching staff in early June when they're not playing games. Like, let's let the chips fall and see if they get this thing figured out and moving in the right direction again, or if they falter, then I think it's fair to start to ask some questions about the responsibilities and what's going on. But, for the most part, I think we talked about the relationships that Yogi's got with this group, the work that he had done with injured players, getting them back up to speed and getting them back into the lineup. And that was one of the things that Rick Tocchet talked about. Tocchet did say that they want to replace Yogi, that this isn't going to be something that's just absorbed in the organization, that they do want a devoted skills coach. So we'll see what they may not be finished with the hiring. And then the other part was an increased role for Daniel and Henrik, which is interesting because those guys are on the ice almost every day, most of the days with the big league team, but they still managed to find time to get out to Abbotsford and work with some of the prospects. So I was curious when I read that in the press release about like an increased role. I'm not sure how much more, but we found out from Tocchet that a little bit of travel, and that's something that they really haven't been doing. Although at least one of the twins, maybe both, I remember talking to, I think it was Henrik in the press box in Edmonton in the playoffs. This isn't completely new, but in terms of regular season travel, that's something that they hadn't been doing an awful lot of. And I guess that's where they would go out to Abbotsford and work with some of the prospects then when the big league team was on the road. But again, I just think anytime you can have quality people like Daniel and or Henrik around your group, input, home or on the road, it's a good thing. So it sounds like they're ready to take on more of a role. And I think their participation should be welcome. And I'm sure it will be.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at it, if you talk to them in their early stages as kind of in the development program, they enjoyed being out in Abbotsford with the young guys. It was one of those things that they both really liked really well. I will say this, though, Jeff. I think that if there was an opportunity to get one of or both of them behind the bench, I think the Canucks would jump at that opportunity, but I'm not sure that Daniel or Henrik Sedin is ready to do that just yet. I think, with the way things have gone in their lives and the way things that, their kids and the athletics and all of that kind of stuff, they kind of just want to do their thing and do it the way that they're doing it on their terms. But yes, an expanded role, are they going to be guys that are on the ice even more? I mean, you're at practices and obviously you see them a lot working with different types of players. How much more hands-on can they get other than actually playing the games? Like, is it going to be PP1 designed by Yogi featuring the Twins or, things like that? So it'd be really interesting to see the dynamic. The skills coach you mentioned that they're looking to replace is going to be an interesting one because that's an important job too. You're not just the quote unquote guy that's there feeding guys pucks. You're early on the ice with the injured guys. You're working late after practices with players who are either coming back from injury, or you bring up, or getting people up to speed and structure and things like that. So that'll be a role that they might go externally for that one if and when they do fill it.
All right, well, we'll add that to the list of things to keep an eye on as the Canucks move forward here in what is going to be, and it's already been a pretty busy off season for them. A question for you. We'll call this our question of the day here on the pod. Brought to you by Great Clips and the Great Clips chat line with more than 4,400 hair salons throughout the United States and Canada. Great Clips is the world's largest hair salon brand and official hair salon of the NHL. For more information, check them out, greatclips.com. Great Clips. It's going to be great. So I'm asking you, Irf, and again, it's early June. The guy's got to make the team, first of all, and then what kind of role will he have? But when we talked about some of the free agents that likely aren't going to be back, I think you lump Sam Lafferty into that mix as well. Tough second half for him. A healthy scratch in the playoffs as well. You've got Vasil Podkolzin waiting in the wings. So the question is, can Vasil Podkolzin give the Vancouver Canucks a baseline next season of what Sam Lafferty did this past year? And I'll remind you, Lafferty had 13 goals, most of them in the first half. 13 goals, 11 assists, 24 points, third on the team in hits, played about 12 minutes a night. Can Vasil Podkolzin replace Sam Lafferty at the very least for the Vancouver Canucks next year?
Well, I mean, Podkolzin scored 14 goals in the NHL. So by that standard, he should be able to do it. The funny thing for me is it's the role. It's what type of player he's kind of turned into here. Now going to get his time in Abbotsford and learning how to be a professional. Like, he seems like one of those guys that, he's out on the ice, he's doing things, he's hitting everything, right? Pucks on the net and shooting and things like that aren't really in his game in that year that he got 14 goals for the Vancouver Canucks. So if it's an expanded role where he gets to play up the lineup, I think there is some potential there, to be completely honest. If he gets the opportunity to play with Elias Pettersson, if he gets the opportunity to play with JT Miller in that top six role. But if it's that bottom six role, Jeff, it's going to be tough for him, because you got to go and create yourself. Is your centerman going to be someone that's able to feed you the puck so you can go and finish it? Are you going to be able to create chances yourself? So all of those things. But I just think of the player that he's become since scoring those 14 goals in the National Hockey League and what he's done in the American League, now coming here the second go round. Yeah, he's probably an everyday NHLer, but I don't believe that he can be one of those 20-25 goal scorers if he's given that role.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you referenced the 14 goals as a rookie, and yet it kind of feels like that offensive switch at the NHL level has just been shut off right now. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, he's been there in his first year, but for him to get back there, I'm not saying he can't do it, but he's got to start with a 1. And he struggled to get 1 in the games that he played down the stretch, and ultimately was a bit of a spare part come playoff time. So big summer for him. He's going to be 23, or he is 23. He's 5 years removed. I mean, it's 2024, and he was a 2019 draft pick. I know they committed to him. He's got his 2-year contract, so there's a little bit of security there. The hope is that he follows the Nils Höglander blueprint, obviously, but one thing to say it, and it's another for him to get out there and do it. So if you, as listeners or viewers, have thoughts, we'd love to hear from you on any of our social channels. You can reach out. Your feedback is welcome. We'll certainly incorporate that in upcoming pods as we work our way closer to free agency. But we've almost worked our way to the Stanley Cup Final. Not there yet, but as we record this on a Thursday, still a couple of days away. The Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers starting on Saturday down in Sunrise, Saturday and Monday, and then a little bit of a break. Travel obviously involved. It's going to be a while before they get going. I think something like 4 games in the first 9 or 10 nights. Like it's not a series that's going to flow at all. And some of that's logistics, just the travel between those two cities. Whatever the case, it'll be interesting with this almost week off for the Oilers and same really for Florida. Like, can they find their games right away? Yes, rest is great, and you get some guys that can get healthy and those types of things. But at the same time, can't just flip that switch. So the race is on. We've been charting this all off season. The race for 4 wins Brought to you by Four Winds Brewing, and now it is a race to 4 wins. Who can get there first? The Edmonton Oilers or the Florida Panthers? The team that does will be the Stanley Cup champs. Four Winds Brewing, family owned and operated out in Delta. Come check out the Four Winds Brewing tap room and kitchen located in the Tilbury area, serving beers, burgers, and their famous tacos every day from 11 a.m. until 8 p.m. Four Winds Light Lager. It's a crisp, clean, and easy drinking beer. You want to load up for the Stanley Cup Final. It's a beer for everyone. Perfect beer before, after, or during the game, and you can ask for it at your local liquor store or have some delivered right to your door through the online shop at fourwindsbrewing.ca. All right, we'll save our predictions, but I do want to get into the Stanley Cup Final just a little bit. Again, a Canucks pod, but we're hockey guys too, and this is it. We're down to the final 2. So maybe before we get to predictions, what are the lines telling us about the Stanley Cup Final?
Yeah, Jeff, it's really interesting when you look at both of these teams and then things like that. I mean, the Florida Panthers obviously are going to be the favorite, to win the Stanley Cup right there, as you can see, as this segment is brought to you by Bet365, a proud partner of Sekeres and Price, Canucks Conversation, and yes, us here at Rink Wide Vancouver. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, which is Stanley Cup here, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use the code VANBONUS. Yeah, Florida Panthers open up as a favorite. The Edmonton Oilers obviously will be the underdog. It's going to be an interesting final. I mean, you look at the one last year. I mean, by all accounts, if you talk to some people, if the Florida Panthers weren't as banged up heading into that Stanley Cup Final against the Vegas Golden Knights, I covered that final. Like Matthew Tkachuk, the broken sternum. I think it was Aaron Ekblad, broken ankle. Everyone on that team was hurt. Sam Reinhart with the injuries as well. Like, guys were hurt, right? And I think that now, healthy, going into this series, it's the Florida Panthers. Like, you have to take them. Their goalie's playing well. They're just deeper down the lineup. But the Edmonton Oilers have the wild card. And that's Connor McDavid. Or should I say, Jeff, Connor Smythe McDavid. Yes, Connor McDavid. Look, I think that, when you look at here, the NHL futures to win the Conn Smythe Trophy, you see him there right near the top of the list. Barkov, obviously, Bobrovsky, Tkachuk, Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard is the one that I would put my money on, because what he's doing as a defenseman and the playoffs that he's having, we really haven't seen it before. So it would be very tough for Connor McDavid, if the Oilers did win, to not win. Like, Bouchard would have to do something spectacular. We kind of saw it a little bit last season. A lot of people thought Will Karlsson was going to be the guy for the Conn Smythe Trophy, and then Jonathan Marchessault ended up winning it because he had a really good final. But anyways, those are lines brought to you by Bet365. It's going to be a fun final, I think, no matter what, once we get all the travel and everything kind of dealt with.
Well, I just wonder if the Florida Panthers can contain McDavid the way those fans did when he was doing the beer run there after the punching the
How does he not have security with him at all times?
What's he doing a beer run? Like, come on.
He just wants to have the boys over after the game. They had a great win.
Get them to bring some stuff. There's other guys that they got to know their role on the hockey club. It can't just be the captain and the star that's doing the beer run.
You remember when the Chicago Blackhawks used to roll in here during all those playoffs runs? I think the security guard still works for them. And he was the guy that was always with Kane and Taves, and the guy that always walked around. How do the Oilers not have that for McDavid and Draisaitl in Edmonton, out of all places?
Yeah, the airport photo of a couple of years ago when he was being held hostage. And then this, just give the guy a break. Anyways, when I look at this series, and obviously containing McDavid is going to be a key. I'm fascinated. I mean, we've watched this Oiler power play. We saw it firsthand against the Vancouver Canucks. We saw it at the end against the Dallas Stars. It went nuts against Los Angeles in that opening round. Absolute nuclear game changer when it's on. And Florida's not going to be able to stop it either. Like, the Oilers are going to get theirs on the power play. It's just a question of, does it win them games? Does it win them the series? Or, the Canucks were able to give up a few power play goals, but still push the Oilers right to the limit. Although that series clincher by Nuge was scored with the man advantage. So to me, the game within the game is that. And also, now people are talking about the Oilers' penalty kill. So it's not just their power play. Their penalty kill has been insane, to the point that the Canucks are the only team to score a power play goal against them. And even at that, it's Elias Lindholm had 2 and Elias Pettersson had 1. And so guys named Elias. I don't think the Panthers have anybody named Elias on their roster. Maybe that's going to hurt them in the long run here. But Sam Reinhart led the NHL in power play goals in the regular season with 27. So he knows how to get it done there. Can the Panthers break through and find a way to generate something, anything? Because I love the matchup. Like, I think this is going to be a really good series. I mean, if it ever gets going, but I'm excited about the series itself and the way it should play out stylistically. I guess I think the Panthers are going to get it right. I think they're going to be motivated by the loss last year. They're the home ice team here. They get a chance to start. But the other thing, too, is like home ice, and we saw it with the Canucks. Like, ultimately, in these playoffs, home ice hasn't meant that much. When you're a good team, you got to be able to win home and away. And so, can Florida take both at home and really push the Oilers into a corner early? I'm going to say no. I think they'll probably get a split down in Florida, and then we'll see where the series goes from there. At the end of the day, I do think that the Panthers win it, but I'm expecting it to go long again. So maybe I say Panthers in 7, which basically takes us up to the eve of the draft and the awards show. It's crazy how late the hockey season is going to go this year. But yeah, there we go. I'll put it on the record. I'm saying the Florida Panthers get this thing done in 7 games.
Yeah, I think the Florida Panthers get it done in 6, but I do think the Oilers take game 1. I really do. I think they're going to get the power play cooking early. I know Paul Maurice is a guy that obviously does a lot of his homeworks and things like that. But an interesting thing that came out in the last couple of days is when, Leon Draisaitl was asked about the physicality, and he basically said, like, we're not afraid of anybody. We're fine with that. But the Florida Panthers are a team that is heavy on the body. And we know that with the Matthew Tkachuk's, the Sam Bennett's, the guys that like to run, even Reinhart, likes to run around a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Oilers can weather that storm in game 1 and 2 in Florida, but B, not get into stupid penalty trouble with guys taking the retaliation penalties. We know the referees generally put away their whistles in the final and let the guys play, but it's going to be interesting to see kind of that matchup with these two teams.
Yeah, and I think you look at a matchup, certainly the start the series in Florida, Panthers have home ice, Sasha Barkov against McDavid. Yeah. I mean, you got the best defensive forward in the NHL against the most explosive player in the National Hockey League. And so, again, game within the game there. And then look, OEL, you think, like, he hadn't even been bought out by the Canucks at this time last year. I was looking the other day, I think it was June 15th. So he's still on the Canucks payroll now, but he was still on the Canucks roster at this time last year. We know how that all played out, but good for him. He's playing for a Stanley Cup Final. Obviously, Gustav Forsling has really developed into a key for that Florida Panther hockey club. And just wild to me that the 4 top picks from that 2014 draft are all skating in the Stanley Cup Final. The first time that's ever happened, 4 guys at the top of the draft class. Obviously, they weren't all selected by these 2 teams, but Draisaitl was picked by the Oilers, and Ekblad was the first overall pick. And then you mentioned Bennett, and you've got Reinhart as well. So 4 guys that went at the top of their draft a decade ago, and here they are now vying for the Stanley Cup. So let's get it going. It's been a while waiting for hockey here, but finally, and before too long, we'll have some games to talk about. We won't have to worry about all the sideshows that are taking place, like Luke Gastic and others. We got through the whole podcast without even mentioning him, and I think we'll just leave it at that. Yeah, fair enough. All right, that is going to do it for us. We'll be monitoring the Stanley Cup Final. Again, we'll see what the next week brings in terms of news from the Vancouver Canucks, but for now, we'll call this a day here. Again, Rink Wide Vancouver, a presentation of both the Applewood Auto Group and the Vancouver Canadians. We thank them for their support. Thank Jacob and Mike working hard behind the scenes. For Irfaan Gaffar, I'm Jeff Patterson. Thanks so much for listening to another edition of Rink Wide Vancouver.
Thanks for watching this video. For more great content from Canucks Army, check out Sakaris and Price, Rink Wide Vancouver, or our show, Canucks Conversation. We're your one-stop shop for interviews, breaking news, and a live Canucks postgame show hosted by Jeff Patterson.